we're going to take a look at making 9-sliced sprites for panel backgrounds, positioning elements using the vertical layout group component, changing button state through a basic animation, and menu navigation options. So let's get straight to it. If we open up our Unity project and go to Scenes, Section 2, Intermediate UI Elements, and open up the Section 2 Start Scene, you'll see we have a basic scene with a main camera, an environment made of simple cubes, and a simple particle system that just spawns cubes to add some movement to our background. We've also got a canvas set to screen space overlay, which we've seen before, with a logo image on it. The first thing we're going to do in this video is create a new UI panel. What we'll be doing with this is creating a menu in the center of the screen here. So we'll anchor this in the center of the screen, change the width to 380 pixels by 420 pixels high, and call this Main Menu. We're going to change the image color to a fully opaque white. And if you go into our UI, Sprites, Common Elements folder, you'll see a variety of sprites that we have to design our UI in this section. The one that we want to look at now is Menu Background. And what we need to do with this image is use it to create a 9-sliced sprite. We're going to click into the Sprite Editor on the import settings of the image. And I'll just make this a little bit bigger here so that we can see. This lets us create what is called a 9-sliced sprite, which basically means when you set the bounds from each side of the image, it'll slice the image into 9 pieces. What we're going to do is set each of these to 45 pixels in the left, top, right, and bottom. And this lets Unity stretch the middle sections to match the width and height of the panel we set the image on, without stretching the corners of the sprite. So if we click Apply up to the top here, close the Sprite Editor, and go to our main menu, drag the sprite onto the source image property, you'll see that we can change the width of this to anything we want. Say 1900 even, and the sprite will stretch, but just in these middle sections, so that our corner sections remain the same. I'm going to set this back to 380 width, because that's the size that we want to use in our design. And I'm also going to put the logo below the main menu in our canvas hierarchy, so that it displays on top of the main menu. And we'll move the main menu down by about 50 pixels, just to give it a little bit more space. Our next step is going to be creating 4 menu items on our menu, so that the user can click through the menu. We'll choose our main menu, click Create Empty Child Object, and call it Items. Items is going to be stretched, so go to the anchoring button on its rect transform, hold Shift and Alt so that we're setting the pivot and the position, and click the bottom right stretch button to set the width and height equal to the main menu's width and height. Now on our items, we're going to create a new empty child and call it Menu Item. This is going to be the basis of all of our child items in this menu, so we'll design it first and duplicate it 3 times to make 4 menu options. Menu Item is going to have 3 children. The first is going to be an image, so create an empty child, add an image component. The second is also going to be an image, so just duplicate the first one with Control D. And we're going to create another empty child on Menu Item and add a text component. One of these is going to be the background of the image, which we'll set to Button Background Gradient Sprite, and the other will be used as a button active indicator, which will only show when the button is in its highlighted state. So we'll rename these as Item Text, Item Background, and Item Active Indicator. The layering of these elements is pretty important. The indicator needs to be behind the background image, and the background needs to be behind the text. Next, we'll set the width and height of these elements. The active indicator is going to be 74 pixels in the width and the height. It's going to be aligned to the left of the object and pushed over by 12 pixels in the X to -12. The background is going to be stretched across the whole item. It'll have a padding of 10 from the bottom and 10 from the top. And the parent menu item itself is going to have a height of 72 pixels. If you look at the image type of the item background, you can see that it's set to sliced, which means it's also using a 9-slice sprite to not stretch the image as the elements get wider and taller. And you can toggle on or off the fill center property, which will display the center tile of the slice sprite. You would use this if you wanted to create something like a border graphic around a panel. On our text, we're going to set the color to white, and I have a font that I have bought, which you can also buy if you want. However, I don't have a license to redistribute the font, so you can use another font of your choice if you like. Anyway, I'm going to be using this font called Beatrix Normal, and this text element is going to be set to stretched. It's going to be centered, and the text is going to be our first menu item. New game. The font size I'm going to set to 28. And the width of the item to 280. I'm also going to set my font to align by geometry and to be aligned to the top vertically, and give the text a top and bottom padding of 22 and a left-right padding of 20. This just ensures the text doesn't overlap the edges of our background image. Our menu item itself is going to be a button, so we need to add the button component, and we're going to drag the item background into the target graphic field, set the transition to animation, which is a new type of transition that we'll be using, and click on Auto Generate Animation to create an animation controller and 4 animation clips for our different button states. I'll organize this a bit by putting it inside of the UI folder, creating a new folder called Animations. Inside that, create a folder in here called Menu Item, and call our animation controller Menu Item. In this folder, we'll see our animation controller asset, and we can double click it to open the animator window, which just shows the different states that the Unity has created for our button. If we open a second window under Window Animation, I'm just going to dock that here, we can create animations by adding properties of the button in these 4 animation clips: normal, highlight, pressed, and disabled. What we're going to do with this is, under the normal clip, add a property, item_active_indicator, and set the color on the image. Set the alpha to 0. This is actually just going to be a 1-frame animation. We'll press delete while highlighting the second keyframe. We're just defining what the properties should be in this animation state. So when the button is in its normal state, the user hasn't interacted with it, the active indicator should be faded out. We need to set a second property, which is the image.sprite on our item background. And this is just going to say that the image we want to use on the item background is the current gradient sprite. If we change to the highlighted state, we're going to add both of those properties again, image color on active indicator and image sprite on item background. We're going to keep our second keyframe here and add a third one in between these two, so that we can add a simple fade to the active indicator while it's highlighted, so that it pulses slightly. We'll set the alpha of the color to 0.6, so that it fades from 0 to 0.6 and back over the animation clip. We're going to change the samples here to 15 so that the animation runs a bit slower. You don't need to worry too much about this stuff. We're going to go into animations a bit more later on. And in this state, we also want to change the sprite on the item background. So click on the item background, go to the sprites folder, and drag button_background_white onto the sprite field. This is highlighted red now, so we know that it'll create a keyframe for us in the animation. We actually also need to set this to be a 9-slice sprite. So like we did before, we'll open the Sprite Editor from the image import settings and set the values from the gradient background image by clicking it to see them. 10, 8, 10, and 12. So if we put those in, click back onto the white one and click apply, then change the image type to sliced on item background. If we go back to the animation window and swap between those two states, we can see a change. Now, for the press state, we want to target the same two properties. We're going to set all of these to a transparent alpha value on their color so that it fades out a bit for the frames that the button is pressed. We're going to set all of these to a transparent alpha value on their color so that it fades out a bit on the frames that the button is pressed. We can delete the second keyframe again, and we're going to add a property for the item background sprite, which is going to be button underscore background underscore white. On our disabled state, we're going to target those same values. And the text color value as well. The image sprite is going to be our gradient, which is already set. The text alpha is going to be 0.5. And the background image alpha is going to be 0.5 as well. While the active indicator will have an alpha of 0, so that it doesn't show at all. So everything is totally faded out when the item is disabled, when the player can't interact with it. And that is the basics of animating a button. If we play our game, we can see the normal state, the highlighted state when we hover over the button, and the press state when we click it. And I think that's everything we want to do to make our menu item. It's got a button, an animation, active indicator, background, and text. So now we want to create 4 of these. So duplicate this one 3 times with Ctrl D. But we don't want to have to lay these out by hand each time. There might be more or less elements in our final game. And we might make a mistake and space it wrong or something. If we click our items object, we can use a new component called the vertical layout group. And this will automatically space our elements. It doesn't look quite right here because it's spacing from the right edge of our background image. So the first property we'll look at on the vertical layout group is the padding. This will push our content in from each side of the parent object. We're going to move it in by 50 pixels on either side, 80 pixels from the top, and 40 from the bottom. So we have a little more space from the top of our logo. We can change the spacing between our elements, so if I set this to 20, it'll force them down by 20 pixels each. We've already got a good spacing though, so we want to leave this at 0. We can change the alignment, so which edge or corner of the child elements are positioned relative to. We can also let the child elements control the width and the height. Or let the layout group control the width and height of the children. We do want it to control the width so that they expand to the full width of the menu, but we don't really mind if it controls the height because it's not making much difference at the moment. That lets us space out our elements quite easily. We also want to change the text on these buttons, so we'll set the second button to continue, the third one to options, and the last one to quit. There are some values that you generally see on a main menu in a game. If we highlight all 4 of these buttons, we can see they all have their navigation set to automatic, and we can toggle on the visualization of that, which it sets up for when we press up, down, left or right on the keyboard in play mode. In play mode, we select an element, press up or down on the keypad a few times, and we can navigate through our menu. That's the default navigation, which doesn't allow us to do things like pressing down on the last element to go back to the top. But we'll look at how we can set that explicitly ourselves later on. if we had any elements to the right or left of this, Unity would allow us to navigate to those by pressing left or right. And that's our main menu.